Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Obesity Matters Wellness Workshop. My name is Rachel. I am the Vice Chair of Obesity Matters, and I'm your host for this year-long program. Today, we are going to explore the idea of getting back on track with nutrition basics. Our guest speakers today are Dr. Jeff Alfonsi and Maryam Naslafkih. And with that, over to our experts to carry us through an exciting and interesting conversation for today.
So when we look at processed foods, we are thinking of foods that are changed from their natural states, whereas ultra-processed foods would be foods that are made from substances extracted in food. So it's all about what ingredients are being added and what are their function. When we look at processed food, there's often added salts, oil, sugar, really only a few ingredients. Whereas in ultra-processed foods, there would be those sugars, those salts, fat, artificial flavors, preservatives, stabilizer, hydrogenated fats, and that's when we can see the different purpose and those different types of foods and how it applies to it at the grocery store. So if we look at processed food, we could think of canned tuna or canned vegetables, fruits, yogurt, really foods that are almost at their natural state but are being put through a process to either make them last longer, to make them more accessible budget-wise. And when we look at the ultra-processed foods, it would be those frozen or canned meals, soft drinks, cold cuts. So we see here that the whole purpose is much more different when it comes to why that food has been processed.
It was really interesting when you think one of the great examples that I tell people to do is, think about if you had a vegetable like a Brussels sprout, and if you counted how many chews you needed to take to chew that, it could be 20 chews, right? And then you think about something like a cheesy, and it's maybe 2 or 3 chews. And so actually the whole industry that around this selling certain types of foods, they're actually designed to say, how do we make this food extremely palatable, but very fast to be consumed so people reach for more? And so I think it's important to be mindful that these have been optimized to be flavorful, to be tasty, to make you want more, to eat quickly before you realize you've got cues that you're full. So I think we have to be mindful of some of those challenges. It doesn't mean obviously that they're bad always, I think, but it's also important to step back and say, how are these often designed? Now, there are times where processing, I should also say, are extremely valuable in terms of the shelf life they have. And again, there's certain canned products that we talked about that have great benefits. So it's definitely a spectrum, and there are classification systems that exist to say how processed the food is. So I don't want you to take away that's all bad, but at the far end of the highly processed foods, you can see about how these things can have impact. And there's a lot of interesting research to show that when you eat these foods, they actually over time can affect the taste buds that you have. So you may change how your flavor or your appreciation for certain levels of salt or sugar, so they can actually change, but also the links to your brain in terms of how you appreciate these foods and how you may crave or want to seek these foods out. These circuits in your brain are enhanced, right? And so, I think those are important factors. And then the final factor is oftentimes because of maybe fats or sugars that get put in these foods, the density, the amount of calories for a small bite or density of them goes up significantly. And so all of these things are reasons why we want to be mindful of ultra-processed foods, and why we've seen in the research in general how consumptions of more of these ultra-processed foods are linked to a whole bunch of metabolic diseases like diabetes and then obesity. So that's just the big picture there.
I was wondering, yesterday I had a piece of cake. So I was craving it and I ate it. Normally I stay away from carbohydrates, right? Like rice and bread and all. So I keep away from it. So yesterday I felt guilty eating the cake. But I'm just wondering, how do you manage your cravings, right? Am I doing it? I don't overdo it, but I still eat.
That's a really good question. Jeff, how do we manage our cravings?
First of all, I don't want people to necessarily feel guilty, right? To that point that everyone wants to eat these things, and it's okay as long as you do it mindfully and in a way that's acceptable, right, to you and your plan, right? So, I think don't feel guilty about that. Maryam had kind of hinted at this. One of the strategies I tell people is when you have that craving, again, it's perfectly normal to experience that craving. If you can pause for a second and say, why do I have that craving? Is it because I'm hungry? Really? Because I didn't eat enough? Is it because I'm tired? Is it because I'm bored? Is it because I'm stressed? Whatever. And if you can identify maybe what is the underlying reason for this, and then for each of those things, I try to say in advance, you can plan. If I am stressed, I find, this activity or this breathing kind of helps. Just do it. And it can be short, just a few seconds, a few minutes, you do that. And then you pause and you say, do I still have that craving?
I did want to look at some of the common claims that we could see around foods that would maybe lead us to choose that food versus another, what it means, and also some types of red flags, I call them, when we see those foods. So if we see a food that states is low in sodium, it means that there is 140 milligrams or less of salt in that food. If we look at low sodium on a can of beans, then yes, we still have beans, we still have chickpeas, and there's just less salt to help, keep it fresh for longer. Source of fiber would mean that there's at least 2 grams of fiber in that product. But once again, we want to put that critical thinking hat on. What type of fiber has been added? Is it an ultra processed foods? Because I see added fiber on candy. You would probably get, you might get less fiber in an apple, let's say, than in eating that whole bag of candy. But if you eat that whole bag of candy, are you going to experience gastrointestinal discomfort? It doesn't really mean that the fiber quality is better there because you don't get the vitamins from the apple. No added sugar is one that we see often. It means that there's no sugars, no ingredients that contain sugar or that functionally substitute for added sugars. But it could also mean that you have sugar alcohols in them. Once again, do you like the taste of sugar alcohols? Those sugar alcohols, yes, can be a good stepping stone into reducing the amount of sugar that we have in our diet. However, they have a taste that is much more powerful than the real deal, which would be the natural sugar. And the last one that I will touch base on is fat-free. So that means that the product contains less than 0.5 grams of fat in the portion. But once again, critical thinking hat on, what is the fat replaced with? If we look at highly processed foods, if they remove fat, they usually add sugar to make it more palatable, to make it more tasty. There's also symbols and claims like healthy choices. They're not developed by government bodies. They're just put in as branding often. So also to be mindful of that.
When it says low sodium, because I would buy the low sodium ketchup because I like ketchup, but then it's a trade-off. The sugar goes up. So it's like a little trick there.
Once again, it depends on your health goals, I think. When it comes to the choice that you're going to make, it's not like we are putting a bunch of, if you're putting a lot of ketchup on the foods that you consume, then you can definitely look at how does it affect my health in general to have less sodium in there. Would it be an option to go for the regular ketchup and just use less of it? Would it be an option to go for the regular ketchup and put less salt on my fries or less salt on my vegetables that I'm using the ketchup with? That all comes to our critical thinking hat. Or do I have high blood pressure and do I really need to monitor my sodium intake? And is the sugar intake kind of on the back burner? It's not one of my health priorities. So once again, it kind of needs to be individualized.
Thinking about how you set up or structure your plate is something that is, in a way, it's easier, but in doing these changes, you often meet a lot of the nutritional requirements that it focuses on less dense foods, lots of, vitamins, minerals, fiber. So, it tries to make it easier to actually implement a lot of these things. And so, where possible, to think about how you can design your plates. You may have seen these before, but, really hitting half of your plate to be fruit and vegetables. Maybe there's slight nuances on how people look at these things, but then you'll see the differences, but just, being mindful that this is really, fruits, vegetables of multiple colors, and you get different benefits and antioxidants from these different colors. So trying to have that rainbow there is really an important part of it. And then the fat type, they do recommend those healthy fats to be a part of that, typically coming from, certain oils, olive oil, canola oil, kind of being a key part, with kind of moderation of things like butter or more of those trans fats where you can. Protein, healthy proteins where possible, limiting processing foods, and then whole grains over refined grains, with water being the primary drink. The other thing I'm going to quickly touch on is kind of portion size versus a serving size. So here's some tips that we talk about on how to do that. So again, the actual size will vary. I know not everyone has the same size fists and hands. There are some general rules that have come out that you can do this. For example, like a fist for carbs will be about 1 cup, and maybe fingertip might be around 1 teaspoon of butter. You can look at, snacks like nuts would be about 1 of your cupped hands. When you're thinking about cheese, kind of get just the end of your finger there. Protein is often like the palm of your hand. And salad would be kind of both hands.
I'm all about adding to our plate instead of removing from our plate. And we have talked about cravings a little bit, so I think that they're a great way to set those tricks up. But if you're craving chips or, something crunchy like tortillas, we can always pick a high fiber corn tortilla, add some guacamole, make them into nachos by adding black beans, vegetables, guacamole on the side. That way we have added fiber from our black beans. We have added protein from those black beans. We have added fiber from those vegetables, added vitamins, and added healthy fats from that guacamole that is on the side. So we're not hindering ourselves from having those tortilla chips, but we're dressing them up a little bit more. Mac and cheese. If you have some kids, you know that it's a staple in your household. How can we add to them? Maybe it's by using chickpea pasta to add more protein, to add more fiber. Maybe it's adding frozen peas to that mac and cheese to bump up the fiber and the vitamin content of them. It's all about adding and dressing it up, and that could be applied to any type of pasta for that matter. It's just adding more vegetables, whether it's in it, whether it's on the side, adding some chicken for some source of protein. And if you're craving some chocolate, maybe it's adding chocolate chips to your yogurt parfait. If it's going to make you eat more fruits, and if it's going to make you have more of those healthy vitamins, those healthy fiber, maybe it's adding a little bit of granola, adding it to your granola. Maybe it's including some chocolate in the form of black bean brownies, which is a recipe that I'm going to share with you sometime in the coming weeks and the coming days. So there's always ways to satisfy those cravings, adding to them. That way we don't vilify them, we honor that craving, but we are looking at what are some of the elements missing from it.
I'm going to try to summarize all these amazing tools, tricks, just sort of the knowledge around reading our food labels, understanding what it is that we are putting in our body. So let's start with processing. Actually, it's really interesting because we always say processed food, it's got to be bad for us, but some processing is really helpful. Reading the ingredient list, it is just a great habit to have. It's, hopefully it has some kind of influence on the decisions that we make about our food, but reading the labels and understanding what's there is really important to be aware. Be wary of nutrition claims. Just because it says it's all natural, let's question what that means. Keep the healthy plate method in mind. I love that, the idea of the healthy plate. Portion and serving sizes are different, so use your tools. We learned so many tools today. That includes the healthy plate, designing what goes on your plate, using your hand as a guide to portion sizes that you would consider in terms of how much you're going to eat. And also, I love this idea of just pausing. We forget it, but when we do it, it's not hard. And that can also really kick in a different part of our brain that says, let's be more thoughtful about the choice that I'm about to make. And this idea of a positive mindset, it's about let's figure out how we can add something healthy to how we eat right now or what might happen to be available to us.